Clearwater, Kansas was a growing frontier town in 1878, prosperous from the cattle drives and railroad construction that brought money and expansion. The town's main street bustled with activity: supply stores, a bank, boarding houses, and prominently, the Red Bull Saloon owned by Jack Brennan, a large, loud man who'd made his fortune providing entertainment and whiskey to cowboys, railroad workers, and travelers passing through. Brennan ran his establishment with an iron fist and few scruples, and most townspeople found it easier to overlook his occasional cruelties than to challenge someone so powerful. 16-year-old Daniel Carter was in town with his father picking up supplies when he noticed two young Apache women standing nervously outside the general store. One appeared to be about 18, the other perhaps 15. They wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and simple cotton dresses, their long dark hair braided carefully. They carried woven baskets containing beautifully crafted beadwork and small leather goods, items they clearly hoped to sell or trade. Daniel had seen displaced native people passing through Clearwater before, casualties of the government's relocation policies, but something about these sisters' dignified bearing and obvious fear caught his attention. The older sister, Morning Star, gathered her courage and entered the general store with Little Dove following close behind. Daniel was near enough to hear their interaction with the store owner, Mr. Peterson. "We have goods to trade," Morning Star said in careful English. "Beautiful work. Fair trade." She showed him the intricate beadwork, far superior to anything available in the store. Peterson examined the items with clear appreciation, but his expression was apologetic. "These are fine quality, no question. But I can't buy from you. Jack Brennan made it clear, no trading with Indians. Says it's bad for business. I'm sorry." The sisters' disappointment was palpable, but they thanked him politely and left. Daniel felt anger stir. Brennan didn't own the whole town, yet merchants feared him enough to refuse honest trade. As the sisters stood on the street uncertain where to try next, Jack Brennan himself emerged from his saloon across the street, flanked by two of his men, rough characters named Pike and Henderson, who served as enforcers for Brennan's various enterprises. Brennan's loud voice carried across the street. "Well, well? What do we have here? A couple of squaws trying to peddle their savage trinkets?" Morning Star straightened her shoulders, trying to maintain dignity. "We only want fair trade for our work. We mean no trouble." Brennan approached with exaggerated swagger, his men laughing at his crude jokes. "Fair trade? Indians don't understand fair anything. Tell you what, I'll give you $2 for everything in those baskets. That's more than generous for worthless beads." Morning Star's face showed she understood this was a fraction of the goods' true value. "These are worth $20, maybe more. We cannot accept $2. Brennan's face darkened with anger at being refused. "You're in no position to negotiate, girl. You're lucky I'm offering anything at all." When Morning Star started to respond, Brennan suddenly grabbed one of the baskets and dumped its contents into the dusty street. Beautiful beadwork scattered in the dirt, delicate items crushed under his boot. "There's my offer now, nothing. That's what you'd get for being uppity." Little Dove cried out and dropped to her knees trying to gather the scattered work, while Morning Star stood frozen with humiliation and suppressed rage. Daniel felt fury unlike anything he'd experienced before. He'd been raised to respect hard work and fair dealing, and what he was witnessing was pure cruelty. Without thinking through consequences, Daniel stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, that's not right. Those are their goods. You had no call to destroy them." The street went quiet. A 16-year-old farm boy challenging Jack Brennan was unheard of and potentially dangerous. Brennan turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he assessed this unexpected opposition. "You talking to me, boy? This is none of your concern. Get back to your daddy before you get yourself in trouble." Daniel's voice shook slightly, but he held his ground. "It is my concern when I see someone being treated unfairly. Those ladies came to town in good faith to trade honest work. You had no right to destroy their property." Brennan's face flushed red with anger. "No right? I'll tell you about rights. This is my town. I say who trades and who doesn't. And I say these Indians need to learn their place, which is nowhere near civilized folk. He kicked at the scattered beadwork contemptuously. If you got a problem with that, you're welcome to do something about it, assuming you're man enough, which I seriously doubt. Pike and Henderson moved to flank Brennan, their hands near their weapons, making clear this could turn violent quickly. Daniel had no weapon and no fighting experience beyond farm work scuffles with other boys. He was outmatched and everyone knew it. But stepping back now felt like betrayal, of the sisters, of his own principles, of everything his parents had taught him about standing up for right. "I'm saying it's wrong," Daniel repeated, his voice steadier now despite his racing heart. "And everybody watching knows it too, even if they won't say it." Several townspeople had gathered to watch the confrontation, but none stepped forward to support Daniel. Fear of Brennan's retaliation kept them silent. Brennan laughed mockingly. "You hear that? The boy thinks he's a hero. Tell you what, kid, you got courage but no brains. Lucky for you, I'm in a generous mood. Get lost before I teach you a painful lesson about minding your own business." He turned back to the Apache sisters. "You too, get out of Clearwater. If I see you here again, it'll be worse than scattered beads. Understand?" Morningstar gathered Little Dove, both of them collecting what they could of their damaged work, and hurried away from the confrontation. Daniel wanted to follow, to help them, but Brennan blocked his path. "You stay right there. I want to make sure you understand something. Those Indians mean nothing. They're less than nothing. And anyone who defends them is making a serious enemy. You've got one chance to apologize for speaking out of turn, and then we forget this happened. Or you can be stubborn, and you'll regret it. Choose." Daniel met Brennan's eyes, seeing the cruelty and arrogance there, the absolute certainty that power and intimidation would always win. Every instinct told Daniel to back down, apologize, survive to fight another day. But something deeper insisted that backing down now would haunt him forever, that some lines couldn't be crossed without losing something essential. "I won't apologize for speaking truth," Daniel said quietly. "What you did was wrong, and being afraid of you doesn't make it right." The slap came fast and hard, Brennan's large hand catching Daniel across the face with enough force to knock him down. Daniel tasted blood from a split lip, his cheek burning. Pike and Henderson laughed as Daniel struggled to his feet, refusing to stay down despite the pain and humiliation. Brennan leaned close, his voice low and threatening. "That's your lesson, boy. Next time, it'll be worse. Much worse. Now get out of my sight before I really lose my temper." Daniel's father appeared then, having heard about the confrontation. Thomas Carter was a weathered farmer, strong from years of hard work but wise enough to know when to pick battles. He pulled Daniel away, apologizing to Brennan with obvious reluctance. As they walked to their wagon, Thomas said quietly, "What you did took courage, son. But courage without wisdom can get you killed. Brennan's dangerous." Daniel touched his swelling face, his anger still burning despite the pain. "So we just let him treat people like that? We just watch and do nothing?" Thomas's expression was troubled. "I didn't say that. I said you need wisdom along with courage. You can't beat a man like Brennan with direct confrontation. He's got too much power, too many men. But there are other ways to fight injustice if you're smart about it." Daniel looked back toward where the Apache sisters had disappeared down a side street, their humiliation and destroyed work weighing on his conscience. He didn't know yet what he could do, but he knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't, let this stand. Brennan thought he'd taught Daniel a lesson about power and fear. But what he'd actually done was ignite something far more dangerous, a young man's determination to seek justice, whatever the cost. The humiliation of the Apache sisters had been witnessed by many. But the furious boy who'd stormed forward to defend them would not forget. And somehow, someway, there would be a reckoning. That evening, Daniel couldn't eat or sleep. His face throbbed from Brennan's slap, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning sense of injustice. He kept seeing Morningstar's dignified restraint as her work was destroyed, Little Dove's tears as she gathered scattered beadwork from the dirt, and the cowardice of townspeople who'd watched and done nothing. Daniel understood their fear, Brennan was powerful and vindictive, but understanding didn't make the silence any easier to accept. His father found him sitting on the porch after midnight, staring at the stars. Thomas sat beside him quietly for several minutes before speaking. "You're planning something. I can see it in your eyes." Daniel didn't deny it. "I can't just forget what happened, Pa. Those women came to town hoping for fair trade. They were humiliated and robbed. And everyone just watched." Thomas sighed heavily. "I know. And you're right that it was wrong. But Daniel, you're 16 years old. Brennan has armed men, political connections, and no conscience. What exactly do you think you can do?" "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted. "But there has to be something. You always taught me that right matters more than easy. Well, this is one of those times." Thomas was quiet, wrestling with conflicting instincts, to protect his son versus to support the values he'd taught him. Finally, he spoke. "If you're determined to act, at least be smart about it. Brennan's power comes from two sources, fear and money. His saloon is where he makes his fortune and where he holds court. But it's also where he's vulnerable. Information, leverage, proof of wrongdoing, those are weapons you might actually use." Daniel turned to his father with growing interest. "What kind of wrongdoing?" Thomas hesitated, then decided his son deserved truth. "Brennan's been cheating his business partners, watering down liquor, running illegal gambling in the back rooms, and probably worse. Half the town knows but won't speak up because they're afraid or complicit. If someone could document it, get proof to the territorial marshal or a judge, Brennan could face real consequences. But gathering that kind of evidence would be dangerous. You'd have to get inside his operation somehow." The seed of a plan began forming in Daniel's mind. "What if I got a job there? Working in the saloon, cleaning, whatever they'd let a kid do? I could watch, listen, maybe find the proof you're talking about." Thomas looked alarmed. "That's exactly the kind of reckless thing I was afraid you'd suggest. Brennan's not stupid. He'd see right through it." But Daniel's mind was racing now, strategy forming. "Not if I approach it right. If I act like a kid looking for work to help his family, maybe humble myself a bit after today's confrontation, he might see it as submission rather than infiltration." Over the next 2 days, Daniel refined his plan and built his courage. He learned that Brennan's saloon employed several young men for menial tasks, hauling barrels, cleaning, running errands. The work was hard and the pay poor, but for someone seeking access to Brennan's operation, it was perfect. Daniel also did something else. He sought out the Apache sisters, who'd made a camp just outside town, afraid to leave the area without money for supplies but unable to enter Clearwater again. Finding their small camp took most of an afternoon, but Daniel persisted. When Morningstar saw him approaching, she immediately became defensive, positioning herself between Daniel and her younger sister. "We're leaving soon," she said firmly. "We want no more trouble." Daniel raised his hands, showing he meant no threat. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm the one who spoke up for you in town. I wanted to apologize that I couldn't do more, and to ask what you need. Food? Supplies? I can bring things." Morningstar studied him warily, trying to judge his sincerity. "Why would you help us? You saw what happened to you for just speaking. Helping more would be more dangerous." Daniel met her eyes steadily. "Because what Brennan did was wrong. Because you deserve better than how you were treated. And because—" He paused, then continued with honesty. "Because I'm planning something that might make things right, and I wanted you to know someone cares about what happened to you." Little Dove spoke for the first time, her English less confident than her sister's. "The boy has kind eyes. Not like the cruel man." Morningstar's defensive posture softened slightly. "What are you planning? You're young, alone. That man is powerful." Daniel explained his idea to infiltrate Brennan's operation and gather evidence of illegal activities that could bring legal consequences. Morningstar listened carefully, then shook her head. "This is dangerous. You could be hurt or worse. Why take such risk for strangers?" "You're not strangers anymore," Daniel said simply. "And it's not just about you. Brennan's been bullying this town for years. Someone needs to stand up to him, and I'm willing to try. But I wanted you to know, so if I succeed, you'd understand that justice was served. And if I fail. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Morningstar and Little Dove exchanged a long look, seeming to communicate without words. Finally, Morningstar spoke. Among our people, when someone shows such courage for others, we honor them. We are not warriors ourselves, we're just two women trying to survive. But we can help in small ways. We can watch, listen. We know how to move unseen. If you're going into danger, let us at least watch your back. Daniel hadn't expected this, but the offer touched him deeply. That could be dangerous for you too. Morningstar smiled slightly, the first smile Daniel had seen from her. More dangerous than being Apache women alone near a town that hates us? We're in danger already. At least this way, we're choosing to face it for something that matters. They made a plan. Daniel would approach Brennan about work the next day. The sisters would find positions where they could observe the saloon without drawing attention, perhaps taking washing work or other tasks that gave them reason to be nearby. They'd share information carefully, building a case against Brennan that couldn't be dismissed. The next morning, Daniel walked into the Red Bull saloon with his heart pounding. The place smelled of stale beer, tobacco smoke, and something sour he couldn't identify. Brennan was behind the bar, tallying receipts. He looked up as Daniel entered, his expression shifting from surprise to contemptuous amusement. Well, if it isn't the hero boy. Come back for another lesson? Daniel forced himself to speak humbly, playing the role he'd planned. No, sir. I came to apologize. I spoke out of turn, and I was wrong. I'm also here to ask about work. My family could use the extra money, and I heard you sometimes hire young men for labor. Brennan studied him suspiciously, looking for tricks. You're apologizing? Admitting you were wrong? Daniel nodded, forcing himself to look at the floor submissively. Yes, sir. I let my temper get the better of me. I should have minded my own business like you said. Brennan laughed loudly, clearly enjoying this victory. Well, well. The boys learned something after all. Tell you what, I'll give you work, but understand this. You do exactly what you're told. When you're told, no questions, no complaints. Step out of line even once, and you're done. $5 a week for hauling, cleaning, and whatever else I need. Deal? $5 was barely anything for the work described, but Daniel needed the position. Deal. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Brennan's smile was cruel and satisfied. Good. You start tomorrow at dawn. And boy, I'm glad you learned your lesson. Some kids have to learn the hard way that power is what matters in this world, not principles. You're going to do just fine working for me. As Daniel left, he felt both triumph at gaining access and disgust at having to grovel before a bully. But it was necessary. He'd gotten inside Brennan's lair. Now came the harder part, gathering evidence, staying safe, and finding a way to bring down someone who seemed untouchable. The furious boy had a plan, and with the unexpected help of the sisters he defended, he was about to discover just how much courage and cleverness could accomplish against power and corruption. Daniel's first week working at the Red Bull Saloon was grueling and eye-opening. He hauled heavy beer barrels, scrubbed floors until his hands were raw, and cleaned up after drunken patrons who treated him like furniture. Brennan watched him carefully during those initial days, testing whether the boy's submission was genuine or an act. Daniel played his role perfectly, obedient, hard-working, keeping his eyes down and his mouth shut even when witnessing things that made his blood boil. But Daniel was also watching and listening carefully. The saloon's routine became clear quickly. Legitimate business happened in the main room during the day, but after dark, the real money flowed through the back rooms where illegal gambling operations ran nightly. High-stakes poker games attracted wealthy travelers and local businessmen, with Brennan taking a substantial cut while his dealers employed tricks to ensure the house won more than chance would allow. Daniel noted names, amounts, patterns of cheating that became obvious once you knew to look for them. Morningstar and Little Dove had indeed found work nearby, taking in washing for several boarding houses, which gave them legitimate reason to move through the area. They developed a system of subtle communication with Daniel, marked stones left in specific locations, brief exchanges when Daniel took out trash or made deliveries. The sisters proved remarkably perceptive, observing things Daniel couldn't see from inside the saloon. "The man Pike meets with someone after midnight on Wednesdays," Morningstar reported during one careful conversation. "They exchange packages. We couldn't see what, but it looked secretive." Daniel had noticed Pike's Wednesday absences but hadn't understood their significance. Now he paid closer attention, discovering that Pike was handling stolen goods, merchandise, lost from warehouses and freight shipments that Brennan then sold through contacts in neighboring towns. It was another illegal enterprise, another piece of evidence. But Daniel needed documentation, not just observations. He needed something that would convince authorities to act, something that couldn't be dismissed or covered up by Brennan's political connections. The opportunity came during Daniel's third week. Brennan kept his financial records and important papers in a locked office behind the bar. Daniel had cleaned that office several times, always under Brennan's watchful eye, never with a chance to examine anything meaningful. But one evening, Brennan got spectacularly drunk celebrating a successful swindle and passed out at his desk. Pike and Henderson, also drunk, left him there and stumbled off to continue their celebration elsewhere. The saloon was closing, most patrons gone, and Daniel found himself with an unprecedented opportunity. His hands shook as he carefully entered the office, where Brennan snored loudly, his face down on the desk. Daniel had maybe 10 minutes before someone would notice his absence or Brennan would wake up. He rifled through papers as quickly and quietly as possible, looking for anything incriminating. He found ledgers showing 2 sets of books, one for public inspection showing modest profits, another hidden one revealing the true extent of Brennan's illegal gambling revenue, proof of watered liquor being sold at full price, and payments to local officials including the town marshal for looking the other way. Daniel couldn't take the ledgers. Their absence would be noticed immediately. But he'd learned to write quickly and clearly in school. He grabbed paper and pencil from the desk and began copying the most damning entries, his writing barely legible in his haste but capturing the essential information: dates, amounts, names of officials being bribed, evidence of systematic fraud. Brennan shifted in his drunken sleep, mumbling something, and Daniel froze, his heart hammering so hard he was certain it would wake the man. But Brennan settled back into unconsciousness, and Daniel resumed his frantic copying. He was so focused on the work that he didn't hear footsteps until too late. The office door swung open, and Henderson stood there, his eyes widening with shock and anger as he saw Daniel hunched over the forbidden ledgers. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Henderson's hand went to his gun as he moved forward. Daniel's mind raced. Fight, flee, or talk? Fighting was suicide. Fleeing meant abandoning the copied evidence and likely getting shot. That left talking. "I'm copying proof of crimes," Daniel said with a calmness he didn't feel. "Brennan's been cheating, stealing, bribing officials. I've got evidence now, and if you hurt me, it all gets sent to the territorial marshal." Henderson laughed harshly. "You stupid kid. You think you're the first person to try something like this? Brennan's untouchable. He owns this town. Whatever evidence you think you have, it'll disappear, and so will you." He raised his gun, but before he could do more, a bottle smashed into the back of his head. Henderson crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Behind him stood Morningstar, holding the broken bottle, her face fierce and determined. "We need to leave. Now. Before others come." Daniel grabbed his copied notes, and the incriminating ledger page he'd been working from, physical evidence to support his copies. Morningstar pulled him out of the office through a back door Daniel hadn't known existed. Little Dove waited outside with 3 horses, Daniel's from home, and 2 they'd somehow acquired. "We watched. We knew it was dangerous," Little Dove explained breathlessly. "We stayed ready to help." The sisters had literally saved his life, and Daniel felt overwhelming gratitude mixed with terror at what they'd just done. They rode hard into the darkness, leaving Clearwater behind. Brennan would wake up, discover the attack on Henderson and Daniel's betrayal, and come after them with fury. But they had evidence now, real, documented proof of crimes that even Brennan's connections couldn't completely erase. The Territorial Marshal's office was in Junction City, about 40 miles away. If they could reach it before Brennan caught up, they had a chance. It was a desperate gamble, 3 young people against powerful men with resources and weapons, but it was a chance. And sometimes, a chance was all justice needed. As they rode through the night, Daniel thought about how far he'd come from that moment in Clearwater Street when he'd witnessed the humiliation of 2 Apache sisters. He'd been furious then, helpless, just a boy with principles but no power. Now he was still just a boy, but he'd shown that courage, cleverness, and allies could challenge even entrenched corruption. The furious boy had stormed into Brennan's lair, not with guns but with determination to document truth. And now, with the sisters who'd been humiliated riding beside him, carrying evidence that could bring down a tyrant, Daniel felt something unexpected, not triumph yet, but hope. The revenge he sought wasn't violence, it was justice. And they were 40 miles away from delivering it. Dawn found them 20 miles from Clearwater, their horses exhausted and the riders not much better. They'd ridden through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the animals and let Daniel review the evidence he'd gathered to make sure it was sufficient. Morningstar had proved to have remarkable wilderness skills, guiding them along less traveled routes that made pursuit more difficult. But they all knew Brennan wouldn't give up easily. The man's entire empire was threatened by what Daniel carried, and he'd use every resource to stop them. Around mid-morning, they heard horses behind them, multiple riders moving fast. Brennan had discovered their escape and sent pursuit. "We can't outrun them," Daniel assessed grimly. Their horses were exhausted while Brennan's men would have fresh mounts. Morningstar looked around at the landscape, rolling Kansas prairie with scattered rock formations. "There," she pointed to a cluster of boulders. "We can defend that position. Make them work for it, maybe convince them it's not worth the trouble." It was a desperate plan, but running blindly seemed worse. They took positions among the rocks, Daniel gripping the rifle he'd taken from his father's farm, the sisters armed with Daniel's hunting knife and rocks they could throw. 6 riders approached, led by Pike and Henderson, the latter sporting a nasty head wound from Morningstar's bottle. They slowed when they saw the defended position, recognizing that a frontal assault would be costly. "Daniel Carter!" Pike shouted. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Mr. Brennan wants his property back. Hand over the papers and maybe we let you live. Fight and you'll die out here. Nobody will ever find your bodies." Daniel's response surprised even himself with its steadiness. "The papers I took prove crimes, theft, fraud, bribery. They're going to the Territorial Marshal whether you kill me or not. I made copies and left them with someone who'll send them if I don't return. Your choice is simple. Let us go and maybe Brennan can run before the law catches up, or kill us and guarantee he hangs." It was a bluff about the backup copies, but a convincing one. Pike and Henderson exchanged uncertain looks. Killing a white boy and 2 Apache women was one thing. Doing it when the evidence would still reach authorities was another matter entirely. The standoff might have continued with uncertain outcome, but fate intervened in an unexpected form. A column of cavalry appeared on the horizon, a routine patrol from Fort Riley returning to base. Henderson cursed viciously. "Pike, we gotta go. Can't be caught here with drawn weapons on civilians." Pike hesitated, fury and calculation warring on his face, but Henderson was right. Being caught by military in the act of threatening people would lead to questions they couldn't answer. "This isn't over," Pike snarled at Daniel. "Brennan will find you. You've made an enemy who never forgets." They wheeled their horses and rode hard back toward Clearwater. The cavalry patrol, led by a young lieutenant named Morrison, approached the rock formation carefully. Daniel emerged with hands visible and non-threatening. "Sir, we need help. We're carrying evidence of crimes committed in Clearwater, and we're trying to reach the Territorial Marshal. The men who just fled were trying to stop us, violently." Morrison examined the disheveled trio, a farm boy and 2 Apache women, all clearly exhausted, telling an unlikely story. But something about Daniel's earnestness and the sister's obvious fear convinced him to at least listen. Daniel explained everything: the initial humiliation of the sisters, Brennan's corruption, his infiltration to gather evidence, the escape and pursuit. Morningstar supported his account, adding details Daniel had missed. Morrison examined the copied evidence, his expression growing serious as he read. If this is accurate, these are serious crimes. Federal crimes, actually, since some of this involves fraud against railroad shipments. That's interstate commerce. This needs to reach proper authorities immediately. He made a decision. I'll provide escort to Junction City. You'll give statements to both the territorial marshal and the fort commander. These allegations need proper investigation. The journey to Junction City took another day, but with cavalry escort, it was safe. Daniel spent the time organizing his evidence and preparing his statement. Morningstar and Little Dove did the same, adding their witness accounts of the initial humiliation and the broader pattern of abuse toward Native people in Clearwater. When they finally reached the marshal's office, the official reception was initially skeptical. A farm boy and two Apache women making serious accusations against an established businessman seemed unlikely. But the documented evidence was undeniable, and Lieutenant Morrison's backing gave it credibility that couldn't be easily dismissed. The territorial marshal, a careful man named William Crawford, examined everything methodically. This is substantial, if it's genuine. We'll need to verify the documents against actual records in Clearwater. That will require a raid, going in with enough force that Brennan can't destroy evidence before we secure it. He looked at Daniel with new respect. Son, you've done something remarkable and dangerous. If this evidence holds up, you've brought down a significant criminal operation. But you've also made powerful enemies. You understand that? Daniel nodded soberly. I understand, sir. But it was the right thing to do. Those sisters deserved justice for how they were treated. And Clearwater deserved better than being controlled by a criminal. Crawford turned to Morningstar and Little Dove. And you too, you're witnesses to multiple crimes, and you assisted in a lawful effort to bring criminals to justice. That takes courage, especially given how Native people are often treated in these situations. I'll make sure your testimony is heard and protected. The raid on Clearwater happened 3 days later. Marshal Crawford, backed by federal marshals and cavalry from Fort Riley, descended on the Red Bull Saloon at dawn. Brennan tried to resist, his men tried to fight, but they were overwhelmed by superior numbers and legal authority. The physical ledgers Daniel had copied from were found exactly where he described them, hidden in Brennan's office. Additional evidence emerged during the search: stolen property, illegal weapons, documentation of the bribery scheme that implicated the town marshal and 2 city councilmen. Brennan, Pike, Henderson, and 4 others were arrested and transported to federal custody. The charges were extensive: fraud, theft, operating illegal gambling, bribery of officials, assault, and attempted murder in the pursuit of Daniel and the sisters. Brennan raged and threatened, but his power had evaporated the moment real legal authority arrived with evidence that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. The trial, held 6 weeks later in the territorial capital, was comprehensive and damning. Daniel testified, his copied evidence supported by the actual ledgers. Morningstar and Little Dove testified about the initial incident and subsequent events. Even some of Brennan's former employees turned witness, now that his intimidating power was broken. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on multiple counts. Brennan received 15 years in territorial prison. Pike and Henderson got 10 years each. The bribed officials were removed from office and faced their own charges. The corrupt town marshal was replaced by a deputy marshal appointed by the territorial government with specific instructions to rebuild trust and enforce law fairly. Clearwater itself underwent a transformation. The removal of Brennan's stranglehold allowed honest merchants and citizens to speak up, to participate in governance, to build the kind of community they'd wanted but had been too afraid to create while under his control. 6 months after the trial, Daniel stood on Clearwater's main street, which looked remarkably different from his first memory of humiliation and cruelty. Morningstar and Little Dove had opened a small shop selling their beautiful beadwork and leather goods, work now appreciated and fairly valued by townspeople who'd learned hard lessons about prejudice and justice. The shop was successful enough that they'd brought other family members from the reservation to help, building a small Apache community integrated into Clearwater's economy and society. Daniel, now 17, had become something of a local hero, though he tried to avoid that label. He'd returned to farming with his father, but he'd also been offered a position as deputy marshal when he turned 18, recognition of the courage and integrity he'd demonstrated. "You showed this town what real strength looks like," the new marshal told him. "Not intimidation or violence, but standing up for what's right when everyone else was too scared. That's the kind of person I want helping me enforce law fairly." On this particular afternoon, Daniel visited Morningstar's shop. She'd become a friend during the months since the trial, someone who understood what he'd risked and why. "I heard about the marshal's offer," she said, smiling. "Will you accept?" Daniel considered. "Maybe. Pa needs help on the farm, but I think what happened taught me something important. About justice, about standing up to bullies, about how one person who refuses to be silent can change things. If I can help make sure what happened to you and Little Dove doesn't happen to others, maybe that's worth doing." Morningstar nodded approvingly. "Among my people, warriors aren't just those who fight. They're those who protect the vulnerable and stand for what's right. You are a warrior, Daniel Carter, even if you're young and think of yourself as just a farm boy." Daniel felt heat rise in his face but also pride. "I couldn't have done it without you too. You literally saved my life. And you took huge risks helping me." Little Dove, working nearby on an intricate beadwork pattern, spoke up. "You took risks for us first, when we were strangers and you had no reason to care. You defended us when no one else would. That's why we helped you, because you showed us that not all white people are like Brennan, that some truly believe in justice." Daniel thought back to that moment in the street when he'd seen the sisters humiliated, when he'd felt fury at injustice so intense it overrode his fear. He'd stormed into Brennan's lair, not literally at first, but eventually, gathering evidence that brought down corruption. The revenge he'd sought wasn't violence or humiliation returned, it was justice, accountability, and the transformation of a community that had lost its way. "I'm glad I spoke up that day," Daniel said. "Even though it led to trouble, even though it was scary. Because staying silent would have been worse. Letting cruelty stand unchallenged would have eaten at me forever. That's the difference between people like you and people like Brennan," Morningstar observed. "He thought power was about making others fear him. You proved power is about having the courage to stand for what's right even when you're scared. That's real strength." She smiled warmly. "And that's why you'll make an excellent deputy marshal someday. Because you understand that law should protect everyone, not just those with money and influence." As Daniel left the shop and walked down Clearwater's main street, he noticed the changes everywhere. The Apache Sisters shop was just one symbol. The new town council had passed ordinances protecting all residents from discrimination. The merchants who'd been too afraid to trade with native people before now welcomed their business. Children of different backgrounds played together in the street. It wasn't perfect. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight, but it was better. Much better. And it had started with one furious boy who'd refused to accept that might made right, who'd risked everything to seek justice for two humiliated sisters. The story of what had happened in Clearwater spread throughout Kansas Territory, becoming something of a legend. The details changed in various tellings, sometimes exaggerating Daniel's bravery, sometimes romanticizing the confrontation. But the core truth remained, that courage didn't require age or size or weapons, that justice could triumph over corruption when someone was brave enough to fight for it, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge wasn't violence but the restoration of dignity and the establishment of fairness. The furious boy had stormed into the lair and taken his revenge, not through bloodshed but through truth, documentation, and an unwavering commitment to right over wrong. And in doing so, he not only defended two Apache sisters but had transformed an entire community, proving that even in the harsh frontier where power often seemed to belong only to the ruthless, conscience and courage could still prevail.